What if the person you trusted the most turned out to be the one who would destroy your life? A shocking betrayal within a family, where blood should bind, but instead, it tears apart. This is a story of sisterhood gone terribly wrong. A sister's deadly betrayal that shocked everyone, and the devastating impact it had on the family. Welcome to Beneath the Surface, the dark side of crime. In today's gripping true crime story, we explore one of the most shocking betrayals a family can endure, the devastating actions of a sister who betrayed her own sibling. Betrayal is one of the most painful experiences we can face, and when it comes from someone who is supposed to love and protect you, it cuts deeper than most. Join us as we uncover the dark layers of family loyalty, deceit, and the horrifying consequences that followed. This is the story of two sisters, once inseparable, bound by shared memories, secrets, and love. But as the years passed, cracks began to form in their seemingly unbreakable bond. A betrayal, one so shocking it would change their lives forever, would expose the darkest side of family loyalty. The motives behind the betrayal were complex, driven by jealousy, desperation, and a twisted need for control. What happened when one sister's dark secrets came to light? Let's delve into a betrayal that no one could have predicted: Millwood, a quiet suburban town that seemed to have been forgotten by time. A place where secrets had a way of slithering beneath the surface, hidden behind white picket fences and well-kept lawns. It was a town where everyone knew everyone, and nothing ever seemed out of place, until one fateful night when everything changed. Sarah Montgomery was the picture-perfect older sister. Beautiful, confident, and effortlessly charming. She was the kind of person who commanded attention in every room she entered. From the outside, it seemed as though she had it all: perfect grades, a perfect family, and an ever-growing list of admirers. But under the surface, things were beginning to crack. Her younger sister, Emily, had always looked up to Sarah. She admired her confidence, her beauty, and the ease with which Sarah navigated the world. Emily had grown up in Sarah's shadow, watching as their parents' attention and love seemed to revolve around Sarah's every move. But there was a darker side to Emily's admiration, a deep-seated envy that had festered over the years. Emily's quiet demeanor often hid the resentment that simmered beneath the surface. And as Sarah's life took a darker turn, Emily found herself tangled in a web of secrets, manipulation, and eventually, betrayal, so much darker than anyone could have predicted. Cracks in the mirror. Sarah's descent into chaos was gradual at first, like a slow poison creeping into her veins. It started with alcohol, then pills, and soon, cocaine. She had always prided herself on being in control, but now she was slipping, fast. The world that once adored her began to push her away, and the perfect facade she had worked so hard to maintain began to unravel. Emily watched it all from the sidelines. She told herself she was just trying to protect her sister, to help her get back on track, but deep down, she was both repelled and fascinated by Sarah's self-destruction. It wasn't just about the drugs. Sarah's reckless behavior extended to every aspect of her life. She became involved with dangerous people who used her, manipulated her, and ultimately became part of the very chaos that consumed her. But what disturbed Emily the most was the way Sarah seemed to thrive in her own misery. There was a darkness in Sarah's eyes now, a twisted satisfaction in her own destruction. It was as if she reveled in the control she had over her family's downfall, and Emily was helpless to stop it. Them. The tipping point came one rainy night when Emily arrived home to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she clutched an envelope. The smell of alcohol and cigarette smoke filled the room, thick and oppressive. "Emily, I need you to understand something." Sarah's voice was hoarse as though she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was something else in them, a coldness. "I did something terrible." Emily's heart stopped. She knew instinctively that whatever Sarah was about to say would be the final blow. "I stole." Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "From Mom and Dad. I needed the money, Em. You don't understand what it's like. I didn't have a choice." Sarah had always been reckless, but this was something darker. Emily's mind raced. Her parents were already struggling to keep their family business afloat. The last thing they needed was for Sarah to jeopardize everything. The money, stolen to feed Sarah's addiction, could ruin their family, their future, and their reputation. But what disturbed Emily even more was the realization that this wasn't the first time Sarah had crossed a line. It was just the first time it had become undeniable. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but I had to, Em. I had no choice," Sarah said, her voice barely audible, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as her sister. Emily's blood ran cold. The weight of Sarah's confession pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She could see it all now. The destruction, the shattered trust, the fractured family. Emily had always tried to protect Sarah, but now she realized she had been enabling her downfall. Every lie, every cover-up had only made things worse. Sarah begged her to keep the secret, to shield her from their parents' wrath. Emily stood at the edge of the precipice, torn between family loyalty and the overwhelming need to expose the truth. She knew what Sarah had done could destroy them, but if she kept quiet, she would be complicit in the destruction of their family. The guilt was too much to bear. But the decision wasn't easy. Emily had always been the one to take care of Sarah, to put her needs before her own. But this was different. This wasn't just another mistake. It was a betrayal, one that cut deeper than anything they had experienced before. In the dead of night, Emily stood in their parents' bedroom, the letter in her hand. She had promised herself she wouldn't be the one to expose Sarah, but now she understood. There was no other way. With trembling hands, she placed the letter on the dresser, knowing that once it was discovered, everything would change. When their parents discovered the truth, all hell broke loose. Their mother, once a picture of strength and grace, crumbled under the weight of the betrayal. Their father, a man who had always prided himself on providing for his family, was shattered. The world he had worked so hard to build was now in ruins, and it was all because of Sarah. But it wasn't just Sarah who was affected. Emily, too, was caught in the fallout. She was no longer the innocent sister who had tried to protect her family. Now, she was viewed with suspicion, blamed for enabling Sarah's behavior. The guilt gnawed at her, but something else simmered beneath the surface. Resentment. She had been the one to cover up Sarah's mistakes, to take the blame for everything, and yet Sarah was the one who had taken everything from them. The family splintered. Sarah, overwhelmed by guilt and the realization that her life had spiraled beyond repair, disappeared. No one knew where she went, but the damage was done. Emily's life was now in ruins, and her family was irrevocably broken. Months passed, and Emily's life became a quiet, agonizing routine. She tried to rebuild, to heal, but the scars were too deep. She still didn't know where Sarah had gone, but every night she felt the haunting shadow of her sister's betrayal hanging over her. Then, one cold autumn evening, Emily received a call that would forever change her understanding of betrayal. It was from Sarah. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so. "Em, I've lost everything," Sarah said, her words laced with a coldness that sent a chill down Emily's spine. "But you won. You exposed me, and now you'll pay for it." There was a finality in her voice, something that suggested Sarah had planned this all along. It wasn't just about addiction or mistakes. It was about power, control, and the twisted pleasure of watching someone fall. In that moment, Emily realized the horrifying truth. Her sister's betrayal had been calculated from the start. Sarah had always been the puppet master, and Emily had been the unwitting pawn. Sarah's disappearance marked the end of Emily's family as she had known it. The once tight-knit bond was destroyed, and the haunting memories of betrayal lingered like a dark cloud over Emily's life. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of silence and denial, had finally been exposed, but it had come at a devastating cost. As the years passed, Emily was left to rebuild her life, but she would never be the same. The shadows of the past haunted her every step, and the chilling realization that her sister's betrayal had been planned from the very beginning would never leave her. Weeks turned into months, and still, there was no word from Sarah. Emily went through the motions of daily life, trying to keep up the pretense of normalcy, but the weight of her sister's betrayal hung over her like a constant storm cloud. The house they had grown up in felt different now, empty, hollow, as if the very walls had absorbed the darkness that had torn their family apart. Their parents, once so proud of their daughters, withdrew into themselves. They no longer spoke of Sarah, as though acknowledging her existence might make the situation even more real. Emily, too, avoided mentioning Sarah's name, afraid that doing so would somehow reopen the wounds she wasn't sure could ever heal. But as time passed, Emily began to feel something she hadn't expected, a sense of unease. There were times when she would catch glimpses of someone in the distance, a shadow, a figure slipping through the corners of her vision. At night, she would hear the faintest sounds, like footsteps or a door creaking open. Her heart would race, her breath would catch, but when she turned around, there was nothing. It was always just her, alone in the quiet, haunted house. There was no rational explanation for these feelings, but Emily couldn't ignore the fact that every time she thought of Sarah, a chill would crawl up her spine. Something about her sister's disappearance didn't sit right. She had always known Sarah to be reckless, to push boundaries, but to disappear without a trace? That was not like her. It wasn't long before Emily's suspicions grew too loud to ignore. The first real sign that something was terribly wrong came when she stumbled across an old journal while cleaning out Sarah's childhood bedroom. The leather-bound book, tucked away under a pile of dusty old clothes, had been hidden for years. Emily hadn't known about it, and its sudden appearance sent a shiver down her spine. She opened the journal cautiously, half expecting it to be filled with the usual teenage musings. But what she found inside was far darker. The entries began innocuously enough, with notes about high school crushes and ambitions. But as Emily flipped through the pages, the tone began to change. There were cryptic references to escape and freedom, and then the entries grew more erratic. Sarah's handwriting became jagged, almost desperate. "I know what I'm doing," one entry read. "I have to leave. Emily doesn't understand. She never did." Another entry. "I've made my choice. I'll make sure she never gets the truth. I'll make sure everything falls apart." Emily's hands trembled as she read the final line. If she finds this, it's too late. The game is already over. At that moment, Emily realized something that made her blood run cold. Sarah had known all along. The betrayal, the lies, the destruction. It had all been part of a twisted plan. Emily had been nothing more than a pawn in a sick, calculated game. Sarah had orchestrated her own disappearance, and Emily had been left to pick up the pieces. The discovery of the journal shattered whatever semblance of peace Emily had left. She couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah had left behind clues, dark, twisted clues that were meant for her. She had been a part of something much bigger than just a family drama. This was manipulation on a level Emily hadn't imagined. But why? Desperate for answers, Emily began her own investigation. She dug deeper into Sarah's life, looking through old messages, letters, and even talking to a few of Sarah's old friends. It wasn't long before she uncovered something that made her stomach churn. There were rumors, whispers that Sarah had been involved with dangerous people. Her drug habit had been just the surface. Beneath it, Sarah had gotten tangled up in a criminal world that Emily had never known existed. People who preyed on vulnerable young women, using them as pawns in a much larger game. And the money Sarah had stolen from their parents? It wasn't just for drugs. It was for something much more sinister, something far more dangerous. Emily couldn't shake the realization that Sarah had been in over her head for years. dragging their family down with her. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, criminal. Sarah had used her family as a cover, as a way to protect herself from the dark world she was entwined with. And now, Emily realized, she might never escape it. Weeks went by, and Emily's obsession with the truth grew. It consumed her. Every day she would search for new pieces of the puzzle, hoping to uncover something, anything that might explain what had happened to Sarah. But the more she searched, the more she felt like she was being watched. There was something off about the town now. It wasn't just the dark feeling that lingered in her bones. People who once smiled at her in passing now avoided her gaze, their eyes darting away when she approached. Her neighbors whispered behind closed doors, casting suspicious glances in her direction. The paranoia that had gripped Emily in the early days of Sarah's disappearance now seemed justified. One afternoon, Emily received an unexpected visitor. An unmarked envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah standing in front of a dingy motel, her face obscured by a pair of dark sunglasses. But it wasn't the photo that sent chills down Emily's spine. It was the note attached to it. She's still here. She's watching. She's never really left. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Sarah's. The night Emily received the photograph, she made up her mind. She would confront the truth once and for all. With the journal, the photo, and the pieces of the puzzle she had painstakingly put together, she set out to find Sarah, or whatever had become of her. The town, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a maze. Every corner held the possibility of danger. Every shadow could conceal the truth. Emily drove to the address on the photograph, a desolate stretch of road just outside of Millwood. The motel was run down, its neon lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. As Emily stepped out of her car, a cold wind whipped through the air, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. She was close. She knocked on the door of room 12, her heart pounding in her chest. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the dim light. It wasn't Sarah, but it was someone she recognized, someone from Sarah's past. A man, rough-looking and grizzled with eyes that spoke of things better left unsaid. "Looking for someone?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Where is she?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Where's my sister?" The man stepped aside, revealing a dark hallway behind him. As Emily walked inside, the sense of dread grew heavier. She had walked into the lion's den. "She's gone," the man said, almost as if he were reciting a script. "But she left something behind, something that's yours now." He handed her a small, crumpled envelope. Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a final message from Sarah. "You were never meant to win. But now, you'll understand what I've been doing all along." The envelope contained nothing more than a key to a locker at a nearby storage facility. Emily drove to the storage facility, the key burning a hole in her pocket. The air around her felt thick with tension. As she entered the building, the fluorescent lights hummed ominously above her, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her. The locker was at the very end of the hall, tucked away in the farthest corner. She unlocked it, her hands shaking. Inside there was a duffel bag, heavy and worn. Emily opened it, only to find it filled with stacks of cash, bundles of it. And beneath the money, hidden under a false bottom, was something else. A series of documents detailing shady business deals, criminal activities, and Sarah's involvement in a much larger conspiracy. This wasn't just about Sarah's addiction anymore. She had been involved in something far darker, something that, if exposed, would destroy the Montgomery family beyond repair. And now, Emily was holding the key to that destruction. As Emily sat in the cold, empty storage unit, the weight of the truth crashed down on her. Sarah had orchestrated everything: the betrayal, the lies, and the calculated destruction of their family. Emily had been nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game. The final realization was both horrifying and liberating. Sarah had never been the sister Emily thought she knew. She had been a stranger, playing a game of shadows and manipulation, leaving Emily to clean up the mess. The game was over, but Emily wasn't sure whether she had won or lost. The days that followed Emily's discovery of Sarah's criminal activities were a blur. She felt trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The dark weight of what she'd uncovered loomed over her every moment, haunting her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The contents of that storage locker, Sarah's plan, the money, the damning documents, made it clear that Emily wasn't just dealing with an addicted sister. She was up against a mastermind. Sarah had been playing a long con, pulling every string in a web of lies, manipulation, and deceit. But Sarah's game was far from over. The eerie calm that had settled over Millwood and the strange occurrences that had followed Emily since her discovery were all pieces of the puzzle she had failed to see. Something sinister was still lurking in the shadows. Someone had been watching her. On a late evening, Emily stood by her window staring at the town below. Her reflection was barely visible, but the night was suffocating, thick with anticipation. The quiet seemed unnatural, as if the whole town was holding its breath. The wind howled, rattling the windows, but there was no escape from the ominous sense that Sarah was close. She had to act before the consequences closed in on her. But how? A knock at the door, sharp and deliberate. Emily froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. Not at this hour, not after everything that had transpired. Cautiously, she approached the door, peeking through the peephole. A man stood outside, tall, dark-haired, and wearing a jacket that seemed too expensive for this town. His eyes, cold and calculating, stared straight at the door. Something about him felt wrong. Emily took a step back, her breath shallow. When she didn't open the door, the man knocked again, more insistently. "Emily Montgomery," he called out in a low, threatening voice. "I think you and I have some unfinished business." She hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't recognize him, but his presence felt familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. The man seemed to know too much. He knew her name, knew she had uncovered Sarah's secrets. Opening the door just a crack, she peered out at him. "Who are you?" The man smiled, a slow, unsettling grin. "I'm someone who knows what's been happening. I'm someone who knows exactly where your sister is." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Where is she?" "Not what you think," he replied cryptically, his voice dipping lower, almost a whisper. "Sarah's never really been gone, Emily. She's been watching, waiting. You've been playing right into her hands." Before she could respond, the man handed her a sealed envelope, his fingers brushing hers just long enough to send a jolt of cold terror through her. "Everything's been planned for you. You've been part of her plan all along," he said, his voice now tinged with something more sinister. "You'll know what to do with this." The man disappeared into the night as quickly as he had come, leaving Emily standing there, the envelope trembling in her hands. She closed the door and locked it, her mind racing. What had he meant? What had Sarah planned for her? Inside the envelope, Emily found a single photograph, a picture of her parents tied up and bruised, lying on the floor of what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. Her mother's face was bruised and her father's hands were bound behind him. They looked terrified, desperate. There was also a note attached. "Time's up. You have 48 hours to make a choice. Come alone, or everything will fall apart." The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Sarah's. Emily's pulse raced. She had been warned, but what could she do? Sarah had been pulling the strings all along, and now it seemed like Emily was the final piece in her twisted game. She was no longer just an innocent bystander. She was now a participant, a key player in whatever horrendous scheme Sarah had orchestrated. Emily spent the next few hours in a daze. Every thought, every instinct screamed at her to go to the police, to get help, but she knew that wasn't an option. Sarah had thought of everything. This was all part of the plan, to isolate her, to force her hand. If Emily involved the authorities, it would mean the end of her family, the end of everything she'd tried to protect. Her mind swirled with the terrible possibilities. The clock was ticking. The photograph haunted her, showing her parents in such a vulnerable state. Her love for them clashed with the bone-chilling realization that they, too, had been manipulated by Sarah. Emily didn't know how far her sister's reach extended, or what kind of hold Sarah had on these people, but she was trapped. At midnight, Emily made up her mind. She would go alone. She couldn't risk further harm to her family. She had no other choice. With nothing but a small bag packed and her heart in her throat, Emily drove to the warehouse. It was a long, winding road through an industrial park that looked as desolate as the night itself. When she reached the location, the warehouse stood like a silent monument to the nightmare Sarah had created. The door creaked open as Emily approached the warehouse. Inside, the lights were dim, casting long, twisted shadows across the concrete floor. The air was thick with dust and the smell of oil and decay. "Sarah," Emily called out, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The silence stretched out, long and suffocating, until a soft chuckle echoed in the distance. "Emily, you finally came." Sarah's voice came from the shadows, but she didn't emerge. Instead, Emily heard the soft click of a gun being loaded. "Why, Sarah?" Emily asked, her voice strained with anger and confusion. "Why do this? Why destroy everything?" From the shadows, Sarah stepped forward, a cold smile on her face. "Because I could. Because you never understood, Emily. You thought you were the better one, the perfect sister. But I—" She paused, her gaze darkening. "I was always the one who understood the world, who knew how to play the game." Emily's breath hitched. She had always thought Sarah had been lost, out of control. But the cold, calculating expression on her sister's face now made it clear. Sarah had never been lost at all. She had been in control of every moment, every decision. Emily was nothing more than a pawn. "Sarah," Emily whispered, her voice breaking, "please don't do this. We're family. We're supposed to protect each other." "Oh, Emily," Sarah said, shaking her head. "You don't get it. Family isn't about loyalty. It's about power. And I have all the power now. You've been my tool, my weapon. And now I get to decide what happens to you." A sudden movement to the left caught Emily's eye, and before she could react, Sarah pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening, and Emily fell to the floor, clutching her side as blood pooled beneath her. She gasped for breath, her vision blurring. "Don't worry, Em," Sarah's voice echoed. "You were always going to be the one who paid for this. You were the key, remember?" The final reckoning. Emily's world went dark. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. The pain in her side was unbearable, but somehow she was still conscious. The blood from the wound seeped quickly through her clothes, warm and sticky. Her vision blurred, but she fought to stay awake, to hold on, even as the darkness threatened to pull her under. Her mind was a fog of confusion, but one thought pierced through it all. Sarah, the sister she had once loved, the person she had tried so desperately to protect, had done this to her. She had used her, manipulated her, and now she was the one who had to pay the price. But Emily refused to give in. She couldn't. Not when the truth was still out there, when Sarah's game had to be stopped. Emily knew there was no going back now. She had to survive. With every ounce of strength she had left, Emily crawled across the floor, the cold concrete pressing against her trembling hands. She was fading, but there was one thing she had to do. She had to expose Sarah, to ensure that everything her sister had built would come crashing down. Her phone, the one thing that could save her. With great effort, Emily reached into her pocket, her hand slick with blood, and fumbled for her phone. The screen was cracked, the bloodstains making it nearly impossible to see, but somehow she managed to dial the one number she knew could help her. Her fingers trembled as she pressed call. Her breath was labored, the pain in her side unbearable, but she could feel the strength she had left begin to fade. It rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. "Emily, is that you? What happened?" Her mother's voice was frantic, full of fear. Emily tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper, the words barely escaping her lips. "Mom, I need you to listen. I need you to—" The sound of a door creaking open interrupted her. Sarah's voice, cold and mocking, echoed in the distance. "You think you can escape, Emily? You think I would let you ruin everything now?" Emily's vision blurred once more, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She had to make her mother understand. The truth had to come out. "Sarah, she's playing you," Emily gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "She's the one behind it all. The money, the plan, the lies. You've been her pawn, Mom. She's been planning this for years." The phone slipped from Emily's hand as her strength faltered. Her last words were drowned out by the sound of Sarah's footsteps getting closer. When Sarah reached her, Emily barely had the strength to lift her head. Sarah's figure loomed above her, an expression of cold satisfaction on her face. "You've done your part, Emily," Sarah said, her voice dripping with venom. "But now, it's over. You were always just the distraction, the pawn. You were never meant to win." Emily's vision began to fade again, but she forced herself to focus, her gaze locking onto Sarah's eyes. "You won't get away with this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah smiled cruelly, bending down to her sister's level. "I already have." As Emily's eyes fluttered closed, the last thing she heard was Sarah's voice, low and mocking, as if she were savoring every second of her victory. But then, something unexpected happened. The unexpected savior. The door to the warehouse slammed open, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the empty space. Emily's body jerked in response, her heart pounding, but she couldn't lift her head. Her vision was gone. But then a voice, a familiar voice, cut through the darkness. "Emily." It was her father. In that instant, everything shifted. The darkness that had surrounded Emily's mind started to dissipate, and through the haze, she saw her father rushing toward her, his face pale and filled with terror. He was holding something in his hand. A gun. "Sarah, get away from her," he shouted, his voice shaking with fury. "Now!" Sarah froze, her expression twisting with surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to come for Emily, certainly not their father, not after everything she'd done. But the look in his eyes was one of unshakable resolve. He was done being manipulated, done being a part of Sarah's game. "I warned you, Emily," Sarah sneered, backing away, her hands raised in mock surrender. "But it's too late now. You've already lost." The gun trembled in her father's hands, but Emily could see the determination in his eyes. She knew that for once he wouldn't hesitate. "You'll never hurt her again," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "You've destroyed this family enough, Sarah." But before anything more could happen, Sarah turned, her eyes narrowing, and bolted toward the door, disappearing into the darkness before her father could react. The next few days were a blur. Emily woke up in a hospital bed, her side bandaged and stitched, the blood loss having taken its toll. But her mind was sharp now, clearer than it had been in weeks. Her father had come for her. They had found her. They had stopped Sarah, but the victory was hollow. Sarah had vanished. Again. No one knew where she had gone or what her next move would be. But Emily knew one thing for certain. This was not over. Sarah was still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for her next opportunity to strike. Despite the terror and the pain, Emily felt something inside her, something fierce, something unyielding. She was done being manipulated. She would stop Sarah. She had to, for her family, for herself. Her father sat by her hospital bed holding her hand, his face drawn with worry and regret. "I'm sorry, Emily. I should have done more. I should have seen it sooner. She was always the one pulling the strings, and I never knew." "It's not your fault, Dad," Emily whispered, her voice still weak but filled with determination. "Sarah's the one who chose this. She's the one who destroyed us." But Emily knew she had to fight back. It wasn't just about protecting her family anymore. It was about stopping the nightmare that Sarah had started. The truth had to come out. And when it did, there would be no more games. Sarah had disappeared without a trace, but Emily knew she hadn't won. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Sarah would return, and when she did, Emily would be ready. The damage was done, but Emily had learned something in those long hours in the hospital. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't the one who was weak. It was Sarah who had underestimated her. Sarah who had thought she could control everything, manipulate everyone. But Emily had seen through the lies. And no matter where Sarah was or how far she ran, Emily would find her. This was the final reckoning. And the sister who had tried to break her, destroy her, would not get away with it. The end of the game. Months passed. Sarah remained elusive, a ghost in the shadows. The police searched, but she had disappeared completely. No trace, no leads. Emily's life slowly began to return to normal, but there was always a part of her that wondered when the game would resume, when Sarah would return. She couldn't escape the reality that her sister's betrayal had changed everything, but she would never forget the strength she had found within herself, the strength to fight, to survive, and to protect the family she had left. And as for Sarah, Emily didn't know when or how, but she was certain of one thing. Sarah's twisted game was far from over, and one day Emily would be the one to put an end to it. Thank you for joining us on Beneath the Surface, the dark side of crime. Tonight's story was a stark reminder that the bonds of family can be fragile, easily broken by betrayal, manipulation, and dark secrets that lurk beneath the surface. While Emily's journey may have brought her some measure of peace, the shadows of the past will continue to haunt her, and the twisted path her sister forged is far from over. Remember, in the world of crime, nothing is ever as it seems. The truth often lies hidden, waiting to be uncovered. If you found tonight's story unsettling, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale from Beneath the Surface. There's always more to uncover, more stories to tell, and the darkness is always closer than you think. Stay vigilant. Stay curious. Until next time, don't forget, sometimes the darkest secrets are closer than you think.